Well, good day, everybody. Welcome to the Lifetime Trainer Talks podcast. And today I've got the one and only Mr. John Sinclair. And John is the director of programming for the Institute of Motion. And I've known him for a long time and had the pleasure of learning alongside of him and most importantly from him for many years. And if you don't know what IOM is, we've had Michelle on and you got to go to the site because they really are changing the way trainers and coaches think. And today's episode is going to be all about something that I know bothers both of us quite a bit. It's the specialization that kids are going through in youth development and coaching and developing and strength and conditioning and all the things that we do. And the parents have the best of intentions, and coaches sometimes I think have best of intentions, but what they're doing is not really going to be great for that athlete long term. So welcome to the show, John, and can't thank you enough for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jason. I'm really excited to chat with you about it. As you said, it's a topic that, and I've bantered back and forth about over a lot of years about this. And from our upbringing, it certainly is different from what kids are going through today.
It is. And, it's bananas out here in Arizona, and you're in Florida. So,
yeah.
The facilities that are going up, I mean, this new one that's going up in Mesa they're calling it the Wide World of Sports, facility, like the Disney Wide World of Sports facility for the West Coast, like just huge. And, what we see all the time is just, more and more kids going to specializations, but then you're seeing college coaches saying, no, we don't want that athlete. Let's kind of just start before we get into that of what have you seen and learned over the years being in the industry, working with pro athletes all the way down to younger athletes and the development and longevity, that they're having.
Yeah. I'll back up a little bit and talk about what it was like growing up in the early 1980s in small town Saskatchewan, which is where I'm from in Canada, which is basically a farming community. I can tell you there was no mega facilities there. You had a baseball diamond, you had a hockey rink and a track at the school, and that was it.
Yeah.
And there was no such thing as weight training. You just went out and played. And, when we were growing up as kids, I certainly didn't want to be the kid that was stuck on the farm and doing the farm work. My dad operated a grain elevator. So, any chance I get to the ball diamond, instead of having to go to the grain elevator and wait for farmers to bring in big tanker trucks full of grain, it was far more fun to be at the ball diamond. So we grew up, just playing everything. And then when I went to high school, I went to a different town, which was nearby. And that town had like 300 people in it for all of the entire kindergarten to grade 12 was 300 kids.
Wow.
And so when we played sports, we played all the sports. And so everything was seasonal, right? So volleyball only lasted a few months, and then badminton was a few months, and then you went in and we would play baseball and hockey separately from the school. But you had to play every sport because there was only 6 seniors on the team. So, there's 6 guys on our volleyball team. There's no tryouts or anything, just everybody played. But what it did is it actually gave us, motor skills that we've had for life now.
Yeah.
And you play multiple different sports, you're going to pick up on multiple different motor patterns needed to be very good and athletic in many different ways. And so I competed in 14 different sports in high school.
Wow.
Now, I say that to the kids that I'm seriously. So I talk to the kids here and they're like, how is that possible? I was like, well, our seasons weren't a year long. They were a couple months long, hockey was obviously 8 months and baseball was throughout the spring and summer. But other than that, all the other sports seasons were really short. And a lot of times I would have sometimes 3 sports I'd be playing in any one season.
Yeah. And what's, especially obviously you're in Canada, so it's not a warm weather state, but warm weather states, you see it even more with regards to, being able to be outside all year round and playing a single sport all year round. So, what have you seen, through the years too, of how this has impacted, like to the benefit of the multi-sport all the way through to, what you're seeing then in the specialization and people just playing a single sport and going after not sometimes obviously a single sport, but a single position within a sport.
You got it. I mean, the thing that jumps out right away is just the amount of injuries that are happening with kids. So we're getting overuse injuries that never existed before.
Yep.
So some of you that are most familiar with the ulnar collateral ligament tear called the Tommy, that is repaired with a Tommy John surgery, right? So it's the ulnar collateral ligament of the elbow, of that tearing in kids as young as 13 and 14 in baseball. That's just unheard of.
Well, and even now it's like, it's not a matter of if, it's when, and get it done early so that they can go on, right? Like that's some of the
Yeah.
doctors, some of the people that I hear, even your broadcasters talk about it.
Yeah. And it's not something that we're normalizing it, and we shouldn't be.
Yeah.
You know, the other one that we're seeing that we're now normalized is ACL tears in female athletes.
Yeah. Soccer.
Like,
Yep.
soccer, lacrosse, all the multi-directional chaotic sports, right?
Yep.
And that's happening from poor programming. You know, it's poor programming and doing too much training.
Yep.
And playing year round.
I was talking with a father yesterday, actually, at a football practice for my son, and he's in orthopedic medical sales, and he told me that at least here in Arizona, at least 4 young female surgeries are done a day on their ACLs. 4 a day.
Yeah, like if that isn't already like waking, like we should be shaking parents, you know, shaking them, and then talking to the actual, like the big thing we're trying to educate coaches and parents on, as well as strength and conditioning professionals and personal trainers, is this idea of creating variability in your training, but also for females, making sure that we match the intensity to the menstrual cycle.
Okay.
And so what's happening now is that we've got scheduled periods of training that are happening that are too intense during important times during young girls' development. And so it leaves them in a precarious position where you know, their ligaments are a little bit more lax, because when they come into their menstrual cycle, the body releases relaxin, which is a hormone that creates a little bit more elasticity in the ligaments, and it also decreases the amount of sensitivity to the neuromuscular system. Wow. So if they have to react quickly, and they're at that time, and they're in that biological rhythm, as we know as the menstrual cycle, they're at risk for a greater shear, with the neuromuscular system not being able to react to protect it. So imagine a soccer coach who maybe doesn't have a background in exercise physiology or biology or biomechanics, and they're doing the best that they can. They're trying to prepare their soccer team, but they don't realize that the amount of foot contacts, the amount of change of direction, all the reaction drills that they're doing can be contributing to an inopportune moment for a shearing effect and an ACL tear.
Got it. You know, and it's hard too. I mean, obviously you have a team of girls, and everybody's cycle might be different. So how do you work within that? And that just, it goes back to the customization and individualization. But anything that you've seen from great coaches that do understand that, on how to deal with that in a sport that, you know, you could have 15 girls on a team and every one of them might have a different cycle. Yeah. Well, probably not every one of them, but
well, and it is true that the longer that the girls spend time together, they will sync up. But they're also, if they're, you know, through their adolescence from 12 to 18, that's a pretty wide range of development that's happening in that time, as well as their motor development as such is going to be a very wide range. Like, we tend to do the same thing with sports that we do with school. We expect everyone to learn at the same pace, right? Well, we also expect everyone's motor development to be the same pace as well, and that's not the case at all.
Yeah. Well,
so we've got some kids that go through big growth spurts. I was never one of them. As you know, I'm only 5'4". So I was super agile all the time, but I had friends that went through, you know, clumsy parts in their athletic development that they need to overcome. And a lot of times there's so many myths about actually developing athletes during those odd times that we're just take for granted. You know, like if you have a fellow that's, you know, pitching a lot as a baseball pitcher and he's going through a growth spurt, he doesn't have the same elasticity in his tissues that he did last year, right? But his expectation is not only just to be better than last year, but to throw harder, because that's what everyone thinks, that their velocity is going to be on a linear path, and it doesn't work that way.
Wow. Well, you know, and you've got two, you know, it's funny, it goes back to my first exercise phys teacher, and first day of class, we walk in and he's got on the board sports are the single worst thing you can do to your body. We were all like, what? you know, and, obviously just with the pounding and the wear and tear, it's just, again, it's not a matter of when or if, it's when. And, but dealing with that, let's go back a bit. And what are some of the more common sports you're seeing this? And then if we could talk about, obviously we talked about the girls and outside of menstrual, which is a big one, and not many people talk about that at all or ever. But let's talk about the imbalances that are inherently there that could increase or exacerbate injury. And then obviously single sport going through the same motions all the
Sure.
time, and how that can impact you.
Sure. Well, I mean, the big ones that where we're seeing these injuries are usually happening during adolescence. So obviously the path of bone is growing faster than the elasticity of the tissue.
Okay.
And so pretty much all sport requires us to be elastic. It doesn't necessarily require us to be flexible, right? And so that's the big difference is that when kids can't touch their toes anymore, the immediate reaction is, oh, I got to be more flexible. And in reality, we need to be more elastic.
Yeah.
But the bone is growing into the fascia like at such a rate that now our tissues aren't tight, they're taut, right? And so we lose that elasticity. And so our programming has to be such to make sure that we're still teaching the neuromuscular system to turn on and off quickly, but also to get that tissue to be more pliable and or more elastic,
Yep. Got
And
it.
so that's case number one. And then the second part to it though is also realizing that you know there's no evidence to suggest that strength training will make you a better athlete. So that will really hurt, stab you in the heart, kind of like your physiologist saying sports is the worst thing you do for your body. There actually isn't any correlation to pure strength and athleticism. It's a biomotor quality of athleticism, but if I get your kid stronger, it doesn't mean they're going to be a better athlete.
For sure.
Right. And so we have to put that into context that if we're going to spend 3 or 4 days a week just doing strength training for an athlete, and the expectation is they're going to jump a level in their sport, that's not necessarily the case. So we have to be upfront and let people know that their rate of development, even their rate of force development in strength training, is going to be different from one kid to the next. I have not my own twins. I always refer to them as mine, but because I've been coaching these kids for so long. But I'm working with a pair of brothers that are twins in lacrosse, completely different entities. One's really long and wiry, one's short and thick. Yep. Their rate of force development is completely different. They're identical, or they're twins. What's the term for not identical? I'm sorry, I forget the
fraternal. Is it?
Yeah. And so the challenge with that is, well, their expectations are we're going to go at the same rate. And once I let them know that, listen, you're not going to be like Gunnar and Gunnar's not going to be like Kurt. You're two unique individuals with the same DNA. However, your body's response to it is going to be a little bit different. And that's what we call epigenetics, right? You create the environment and then the genetic profile will do as it may and what we provide it to get the outcome that we want. And so what we have to realize is that a lot of the programming that is in the industry, in the strength and conditioning industry, while well-intentioned, it's not painting an entire picture of not only performance, but also longevity for sport and performance.
Yep. It reminds me too, something that I heard Mushal say as well, and I'm sure he said it to you, is, when he was going to combines in NFL and, the trainers and the therapists saying, the best ability is availability. And if they're not available, then it doesn't mean anything. And,
Right.
and I want to kind of dive into
Sure.
that concept of, again, well-intended parents or coaches, strength training, maybe to get bigger, but not understanding that, if you look at our bodybuilders, they're the most probably unathletic people. When you look at athleticism as the ability to move, and define that, I think that's an important thing. Maybe if you wouldn't mind, how would you define athleticism, so that people, and then we could tear that thing apart and all the components within it.
Yeah, quite simply, it's your body's ability to express those biomotor qualities that we aim for. But more importantly, it's to become efficient and effective, economical movers.
Got
right?
it.
So efficient means I need to get from point A to point B as simply as possible. Economical means I don't need to use any energy, right? And effective, obviously, it has to have an outcome to it. So a motor task. So whatever our intention is, it doesn't matter if I do it this way or that way, as long as the ball gets to the place in the time that I intended to it, that makes me effective. So athleticism is your ability to express efficiency, effectiveness, and economy. And that will show up in different athletes in different sports in different ways.
Yep.
So there isn't a formula for, oh, this is how you become a good athlete. Like we would hope that we'd have a nice, neat package of how that looks so we could sell that, because it would be easier that way. And in some fitness segments and in strength and conditioning world, we try to do that. And it's not necessarily the case. You're right. Individuality is the key to success.
And you mentioned something, the biomotor abilities or biomotor qualities. Would you mind, some people may have not understand what that is and what those are. And because that's the same thing I look at when we look at athlete, we have to look at what are all of these abilities that constitute athleticism. And, you know, the best people are the best athletes are sports specific. Like your best athlete in basketball is going to be a little bit different than best athlete in soccer. So would you mind going through those biomotor abilities?
Yeah. So they're like, strength is one, so your body to express forces in many different ways. Power is how to express force quickly, right? Suppleness, so the ability to be elastic and mobile and somewhat flexible as well. We have skill, so you have to have this skill not only of moving efficiently, but also the skill of playing whatever sport that you're playing, your reaction. Yeah, all those things that make up a skillful practice. What am I missing?
Like agility, endurance, you know, all of those things.
So those are all those are subsets of other parts. Endurance is and stamina is a good one. You know, those are things that we try to improve through sport. But we also realize that, you know, you and I growing up would spend probably, 6-8 hours a day playing, developing those motor qualities and biomotor qualities on our own, just through the essence of getting with friends and playing. That's the most authentic way to develop those. But now the way things are, we have to shift to a structured schedule of meeting somebody to teach us those things. And if you get a group of kids together nowadays and you say, okay, go out there and you guys warm up for 10 minutes and play a game. They'll go, what do we play? Right?
We play. Their fingers have gotten more athletic.
Right. That's right. Yeah, they're super agile.
With their fingers. But you know, it goes to show, again, getting back to, you know, understanding all of those biomotor abilities and training for those things specific to the sport. And what's funny is that I believe that term was coined by Tudor Bompa, who's kind of the guru of periodization, created periodization. Right. And what's funny though is that he talks about the general adaptation or the general development of those skills, especially early on. All of those and becoming good and proficient at all of those. But yet again, we see this specialization occurring, you know, as sports train for offensive lineman or defensive lineman or quarterback or pitcher. And then we forget about the repetitive overuse injuries that occur through, especially things like pitching and you know, throwing and different sports like that as well.
I think, you know, that parents, you know, like yourself, who are so well invested in your kids and you want to see what's best for them. You want to, I think it's not necessarily just easier, but I think it's a little bit convenient, and also it fits the dream well that I want my kid to be successful. And in doing so, if I could follow a recipe that would make a lot of sense, then I'm going to follow that recipe. And that's where specialization came in. Like if you read this book, Arranged by David Epstein, he talks about the story of Tiger Woods is really well known, isn't it? Everyone knows, you know, his dad had him on Jimmy Carson, for God's sakes, at 2 years old, you know? So like everyone knows about Tiger Woods, but do you know the story of Roger Federer? And Roger Federer played almost every sport there was, and there was no structure to how he became a great athlete. His mom was a tennis pro, and he didn't start playing tennis until his early teens. And so it's a vastly different story. But the story about Tiger Woods is easy to package. It's easy to actually explain, and it's easy to sell. And so in our industry, we've gone through that. You know, you and I, since we started in this industry, strength and conditioning looks a lot different, doesn't it?
For sure.
So you see, like now all the college facilities are lines of racks, right? where it never used to be that way. Like
Yep.
there was a strength and conditioning component, but it wasn't like we're going to do linear loaded training all the time. That's going to be the bulk of what we do. We're going to put lots of size, get these guys faster, stronger, more powerful, and then throw them out onto the field or onto the ice or whatever their surface is. And what we're starting to see now is that hasn't brought the injury rates down, you know? And so we got to think differently about our programming and realize that whatever it is that we're going to do to set these athletes up for success, wherever they are in that path, and I've developed like a little infographic of what a successful developmental path would be from birth all the way through till retirement and life after sport. But the idea is setting that athlete up for success along that so that they can continue in their sport well into their 30s. Because like you said, the best availability or best ability is availability. Well, when I talk to pro athletes, if you've ever worked with a professional athlete, they're less concerned about how much stronger and more powerful they are, and more concerned with, can I get a second or third contract?
Yeah.
You know, because if they can get a third contract, then they're really set for life, you know?
Well, you know, and it's so funny because sometimes, you know, what's terrible with the industry is how we bash everybody, you know, and everybody bashes the other philosophy. But yet, if you look at both camps, you know, both camps have successfully trained athletes to a high level using their methodology. So 100%. Again, one of the reasons why, you know, if you're out there, I love what John does for IOM and IOM because they don't bastardize each other and say one's wrong or right. It's just, where are you spending your time?
That's right.
You know, and is it only in the same quadrant, so to speak? And so again,
and that's why we say, Jason, you make a great point, because I didn't want to come off saying that only having things in, you know, in a linear direction is the only way to train. It is a very important way to train. And what we have to do is offset or cross train for the sport that we're playing. So if you take football, for example, they're playing a multi-directional power sport that's going in the horizontal plane or forwards and backwards, but we're locomoting forwards and sideways. Well, if we do some stuff in the vertical plane, that's cross training for football, right? And so that's where we need to think about, you know, if we're going to specialize in a sport, then your job as a strength and conditioning professional or personal trainer to help that athlete is to offset the stressors that they're doing from that one sport, right? And that's what I spend most of my time doing. In reality, in a lot of cases, I'm spending more time doing recovery for athletes than I am the actual training of it. Because how much more can we put on their plate when they're in South Florida playing tennis 5 hours a day in 90-degree heat?
Yeah. Well, and it's crazy too, because, you know, with the accessibility of gyms now at a younger age, you know, a lot more gyms are allowing kids in at a younger age. You know, certain ones out here, you know, are literally blowing up, especially the ones that are $10. So you forget about the membership. And I'm not bashing it. It's just, what I'm saying here is there's kids that are going to those places to congregate and work out and have no idea what they're doing. And they're lifting for aesthetic because they want to look good and they think it's going to transfer to their sport, or they're not thinking it's going to transfer. They just want to look good, but then they're not realizing how that's going to impact them on the field and potentially risk their injuries because they're doing the same damn thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, so, you're right. I mean, it is definitely something that we have to be cognizant with, and it's good because that kids want to look healthier and feel healthier. But you're right. It's just putting it into context and organizing it in such a way that the kids realize that, yeah, you want to do an arm day? Let's do an arm day. Right? Like exactly. nothing wrong with that. But you know, you've also been playing tennis for the last 5 hours. Let's also do a little bit of recovery with it, you know?
Yeah, love it. Yeah. Well, you know, one last question before we start to deal with some solutions is more, you know, plain and simple, you know, what have you seen from a single sport specialization playing year round related to injuries?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I'm fortunate enough that with the methodologies that we're using now, I'm not seeing so many of the kids that are training with me get injured, which is good. That means we're doing something right. They're able to play a full season without getting injured, but their teammates are getting the similar injuries that we talked about earlier. You know, female lacrosse players tearing their ACL. I've worked with a couple of young soccer girls, and they say usually one goes down every season, you know, and the challenge is there's also a lot of misconceptions about what that rehabilitation is going to look like and how long it takes them to return. And a lot of people go, well, Adrian Peterson, he was back in a year and he broke their record. So then that becomes like, this is what I want to try to achieve. And I was like, yeah, but he was doing rehab 8 or 10 hours a day. Like, you're not doing
You don't know
that,
what else was happening either.
That's
probably.
right. That's right. And so what we now start to understand is that these injuries that are taking place are happening as a result of us not balancing out the stresses that these kids are going through currently, but also that it's stemming from not giving them the opportunity to learn the motor tasks that they should have learned earlier in life. And so what I've had to shift some of my programming around is to start to teach kids how to do things that they missed when they went into a sport early. So for example, when I first moved down to Florida about 8 years ago, I was working at Midtown Athletic Club. And what I found there in one of my first days of working with a big group of tennis players was that they couldn't catch a ball. They could whack the heck out of it with a tennis racket, right? But if you asked them to put the tennis ball down, we're going to do a hand-eye coordination drill, and I hit a ball at them, they'd go like this and block it. I was like, you should be able to catch before you can hit an object. Like the open closed skill quadrants. I don't know if you remember those from motor development days, but Gentile and those guys basically help identify like motor tasks should be done in stationary environments before you create a change in variability of the next environment, which was odd that I found it odd that tennis kids could hit but couldn't catch. So we'd have to, all right, we're lacking that skill set. Let's go teach that skill set. And so instead of just doing things in the gym, now I'm having to, do some motor task retraining to get them better. And so the way it turned out and how I stumbled upon it was through instances like that. But then where I started to see the return on our investment was working with that same lacrosse goalie, Gunner. He is committed to the University of Navy. And this year alone, we started incorporating a lot of higher brain functions. So starting with doing vestibular training, doing things that would influence the vestibular system. So the eyes, so a lot of visual motor training, a lot of things with the ears, lots of head shaking and tilting of the head because he's a goalie. They got to be able to keep track of everything that's out there and also direct the defense. And so we started doing some training with that. And how it paid off was this kid's goals against average was 3.4 this year as a lacrosse goalie. And they won the state championship.
And you spent more time on the vestibular side of it. I love it.
It was not more time, but it was always included in our warm-up.
Exactly.
Right? It was part of our preparation.
It's weird too. There's some friends that I know personally that are involved with a VR company that is working solely on that. We got to talk about that. And I'm working on, having them on an episode soon, but it's all around using VR for vestibular training and hand-eye coordination and quickness, and it's blowing up. So, well, why don't we get into, obviously sometimes it's hard, from a kid standpoint or even from a parent. They don't know what they don't know, or the parent thinks that if they don't play baseball year round that they're never going to make it to the pros or whatever, the mindset is. How have you dealt with parents and or kids? How have you talked to them and hope to see that change a little bit?
Really, it's just kind of setting expectations. I'm really fortunate. The kids that come to see me, this never happened when I was in Canada. It must be an economical thing. But when I was in Canada, you maybe get to work with a kid for about 4 months, and you're not going to see a tremendous change in them over that period of time. But when I moved to South Florida, I'm now working with kids from the time they're 12 till the time they're 18. What's kind of been cool about that is when you apply these strategies over time, you start to see them come on. And I think there's like a fantasy that happens that if you train for a certain period of time and with speed work, then they're going to get faster. And you and I know that sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. You don't know when it's going to happen. And so what I've found over working with kids for a period of time is one day they're just fast like this. It's like their neuromuscular system, everything just clicks. And then boom, they're fast. And that happened I had one of my tennis pro and my buddy, Andy, his son was training with me. And he says to me, have you been like doing a lot of speed training with Tom lately? And I'm like, no, why? What's going on? He goes, he is lightning fast. What are you doing? I was like, we haven't done anything. it just clicked for him,
Yeah.
And so those are the things that are some of it's fantasy, and then other part of it is like the reality of it. And so when we're building programming out for kids, we have to set the expectation that, adaptation doesn't happen in a linear format, and it doesn't happen overnight. But if you have an internal drive and you have a passion for this and you really want to maybe go play college, stick with it. You may not feel that your success, but from the time of 12 to 14 isn't as high as where you want it. Stick with it, because I've seen kids that are dominant between 12 and 14 and get killed between 14 and 16, or vice versa, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so stick with it if you really love the sport. If you don't love that sport and you're kind of burnt out from it, try a different sport. But overall, over that period of time, you're going to find your optimal period of performance, and it's going to click for you. And we're seeing at the US Open. This is the first time they've had an 18 and 19-year-old kids, females, that are in the semifinals of a US Open. It's pretty
Powerful.
exciting times to see that, and both of them were multi-sport athletes, just to tick that box.
So, John, I guess what I heard there too is, in dealing with the parents, is to really just make sure that the kids are experiencing and getting them to the best of their ability to experience other things, and get them to see and understand how, training in different ways and playing in different ways is going to impact them in a beneficial way in their individual sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, each individual of the individual sport is going to adapt at different rates.
Yeah.
And so we have to be clear with the parents as to what we're seeing, how they're improving, things that they are still needing to adapt to, but that they're making progress along the way. And as long as I can get them moving a little bit better than they did the previous week, we're making a small step forward in their development, right? And so that's the conversation I have with parents all the time. It's, they may not, some people see it right away. They see it on the tennis court and they go, wow, they're really moving well from side to side. Great, that's awesome. Yeah. Or they need to get faster getting to drop shots. Okay, great feedback. Thanks for telling me. We'll work on those transitions, but know that that's not going to happen next week. you know?
Well, I've got an opinion, and I'd love yours before I go on a rant, is regarding all of the speed, agility, quickness things that you're seeing at like 8, sometimes even in younger. And I would love your opinion on, understanding all the different biomotor abilities and understanding that speed, agility, quickness is a component of these other abilities. Mm-hmm. What is your take on doing that so early? Is it proper? Do you feel it's okay, or would they be better set doing some other things before they get to that?
I think the best speed and agility and quickness things that you can, let's talk just speed. Like when I was growing up, we were foot racing at one another all the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's nothing that's going to get you better faster than actually running. There's nothing that's going to get you jumping higher than actually jumping. The more we put you into a predictive pattern. So let's just take ladder drill for an example, because when most people see speed, agility, and quickness, even parents, they'll go, oh, they need to do ladder drills, right? And so they lay down the ladder and they do it. Fantastic, because what you're doing is you're developing a purposeful movement that has a task and a rhythm to it, that has a particular pattern they need to get better at. Here's the problem, is when everything we do is so predictive, because sport itself is chaotic. It's not predictive. So it needs to be step one in a series of learning where to put your feet. The other challenge to it is, as kids grow, when they're little, going through the ladders are great because they're only about 18 inches wide. Yeah. But then as you get older, your feet or your hips start to grow, and in an athletic ready position, your feet need to be outside your hips. They shouldn't be inside your feet. Yeah. Or inside your hips, right? And so then that's when we start to get you to go from a wide side of the ladder, right, through the ladder, so that your feet are always in an athletic, or you're always in that athletic ready base. So yes, it does have a role. Is it the end all and be all? No, it's a tool that helps us. This is where we start, and then we start to transition footwork that's similar to like that to the motor task or demand that the sport requires. So I would say it's a tool in our toolbox as part of a recipe for developing motor skill sets.
But would you say that there's certain prerequisites, whether it's an assessment of strength or something before they should really start to get after generating the speed, agility, quickness? What would you say, if
I would say
any?
playing games,
Yeah,
right? Us just playing games. Like the game of dodgeball is
yeah,
a perfect example of how to be reactive in a chaotic environment.
yeah,
And I'm not saying like a murder ball where
yeah,
you're
yeah,
in close proximity,
yeah,
but like having the ability to move and catch and dive
yeah.
and have quick feet and get off your feet quickly to move around that ball, I think is a great game. I don't think we play enough games with kids to help them enhance their
Love it.
speed, agility, and quickness.
Love it.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. Well, let's dive into then some suggestions, and obviously this is what you do for a living for IOM, not only on the people that you work with. So you can get a lot more information at the IOM sites and going through the courses. But talk me through kind of your thought process around, if it's a single sport athlete, kind of what are some suggestions, some specific suggestions on programming that they should potentially look into, incorporating.
Yeah, so the overlying theme of development is really about creating a balance, right? And so if I have a particular athlete, let's break down a sport that we all know so well. Let's say baseball, for example, because that's an easy one for us to break down
Yep.
because we all know the game so well. But if we were to look at how the game is played, we would look at, well, what are the tasks necessary in the game of baseball? Well, I need to be able to throw, I need to be able to catch, I need to be able to do those from different levels. So if I'm a pitcher or a catcher or an infielder and an outfielder, they all have to throw and catch from different levels and with different environments, if you will. You might also have to look at us hitting a ball. So our ability to hit the ball requires, if you're a female playing softball versus baseball, a male playing baseball, those are two different ways of hitting a ball. Mm-hmm. One's coming from high to low, one's coming from low to high. Yeah. And so the way our eyes pick up on that ball is differently. So if I'm looking at those are some of the motor tasks in the game, then I have to look at, well, what are the movements that make up the motor tasks? What is it that the body's doing in a throwing motion, right? What is it that we're doing in a hitting motion? What is it that we're doing in catching and fielding? What are all those movements? And then how much time do I spend doing all that stuff? So I could break this down into much further, but I don't want to make this a really long conversation for you, Jason. But I would take that from there and go, how much time am I spending doing that? Okay, what other things are needed for me to express athleticism? And out of those things, then I need to start spending time when I'm not playing baseball doing these other things.
Got it.
Right? So if you take, well, I'm not doing a lot of jumping in baseball unless I'm an outfielder and I'm jumping by the fence. Younger kids aren't going to be doing that. So maybe I need to pick up a basketball and teach them how to do layups in the backyard, because that's a great lesson of learning how to jump with if you're on the right side of the hoop, to be able to jump with your right knee up at the same time with your right hand, or if you're on the left side of the hoop, to learn how to jump with the left, because that's usually an opposite pattern than what you're doing in baseball. But a very good fundamental pattern to learn footwork, and dribbling a ball is a good motor task. So we would call that cross training, right? It would be something opposite of what you're currently doing in a specialized sport. From there, we break it down into not only just, okay, if those are the things that I'm doing and I want to get better at strength, well, what is the sport doing that requires strength in that sport? How is that realized? And then how can I express that in a different way or a unique way that might offset the stresses that are happening from throwing a ball all the time? Got it. And so for us, we didn't play baseball year round, so we didn't have to have pitch counts and big throws, because I got 8 months off playing hockey from baseball. So think of it from that perspective. If I took 8 months away from hitting a baseball, but then I went back to baseball and I was still able to hit the ball, there's these myths out there, Jason, where people are thinking, well, I got to hit every day or I'm not going to be able to hit the ball anymore. That's not how the motor system works, right?
It's funny too, because the best years I ever played and hit, whether it was baseball or softball, as I got older, were the years that I spent a decent amount of time playing racquetball.
Brilliant. The ball's moving fast.
Yeah, and my ability to see the ball and pick up the ball.
Yeah, you got it. And so that's a cross training technique for the visual motor cortex that would work for the game of baseball. And now today, practice means hitting a stationary object. or being in a batting cage, when you're actually going backwards on the skill level to be able to hit. So you're controlling the environment more, and then you go out onto the field and a pitcher's putting it here, it's putting it here, it's putting it here, it's putting it here with different spins and different release points, and then you're not picking up on it.
But how would you talk? Let's go specific into training, like the
So
strength.
in the gym.
Yeah, in the gym,
Okay.
and how would you maneuver things, and how would you change things up? And there's some people that that say, hey, listen, I could go straight bodybuilding style training and then go and do the movements that I need to do in my sport, and that will transfer. What is that? What have you seen, and kind of what has been the best way? What are some things that you've seen as best practices?
For us, we're one of the groups that kind of coined the term loaded movement training when Scholl invented the Viper Pro.
Yep.
And when he invented Viper, we were trying to figure out, well, where does this fit? Where does Viper fit? And so we said, well, it's movement, task-based movement exercise, but with load.
Yep.
And so generally speaking, we won't grab a barbell and do a side lunge and move it over there because it's too darn heavy.
Yeah.
But we do know that people that replicate exercise as though it's more task-based and with load in changing different directions and always changing levels tend to have a better capacity for forces going through their body, i.e. injury prevention. So they're not only strong, but they're strong in multiple ways, in multiple different environments. So the trick then would be well, how do I incorporate that into my current training? Well, you should still do the traditional activities, such as squatting, bench pressing, deadlifting, but you also need to learn how to squat going this way, and squat with rotation, and squat with loads out here, out away from your body, right?
Obviously not with the same loads. Obviously not with the same loads.
Yeah. I'm not gonna, well, if you could, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I think you'd be on a Marvel movie more than you would be playing.
Well, and it's funny because you get the purists from way back in the day that still said they've read from start to finish Super Training by Mel Siff, which I don't think anybody's ever read that book from start to finish. But in there he talks more about he specifically was saying, don't mimic the movement pattern with load, because the pattern's never in the sport is never going to be that loaded. Right. Well, so what have you seen? Obviously that was many years ago. And things like Viper and different apparatuses that are tools that are out there now weren't available, or they didn't think about them or use them. So how would you talk through that to those people, those trainers who might be questioning, saying, hey, we should never load a pattern?
Right. Well, they're 100% right. We wouldn't do a very specific pattern like a baseball swing with a load that would have me move that slow, because now I'm altering in the neuromuscular system, right?
Yeah.
And the sensitivity of the neuromuscular system, really.
Yeah.
And that's something we don't do. But however, if I take a different task with a different intention in the brain as to what I'm trying to do, let's say it's still rotation with load, but let's say we're going to pretend we're shoveling grain into the back of dad's grain truck, right? And so the idea of that shovel pattern fortifies the connective tissue in the joints and stimulates the neuromuscular system, not exactly like it, but similarly enough to make sure that the architecture of the body, the joints, the muscles, and the tissues are resilient enough to handle force, right?
Love
but
it.
we also need to do that not only just in different directions, but at different speeds with different loads.
Yep.
And that's how we fortify athletes to be able to handle that, is we need to create a known predictable environment first, that they can express force in that known predictable environment. Then we want to expand that environment from known to unknown, but also a variety of tasks throughout that then we add load and add speed.
Got it.
Right. And as we start to do that, then now kids, their nervous system is sensitive enough to be able to respond to anything when they need to. So if they get bumped and they have to plant their foot, they've been in that environment before. Their body moving with that much mass and velocity, that's not as much force as their joint has been through than when I've had them do a bound with a Viper driving towards the ground in the same direction.
It's so funny, Jack, because I was training my son in the morning every day, and we were doing traditional stuff just because we want to put a little bit of mass on him and lean him out a little bit. And then I brought in the Viper, and I was talking to him about just take a small half step and kind of do that opposite kind of punch uppercut. And what am I doing this for, Dad? Like, and I go, will you just do it? Because he plays offensive line.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. The next day in practice, without him even noticing, he steps to the side and takes this guy and just wipes him down on the ground. And then the coaches, everybody was going nuts. And I'm like, and he goes, Dad, that was like what we did in the gym, right? And I'm like, exactly. And it wasn't, I didn't say punch like you were in the line. I just said, just do this movement. So I think that's huge because, I see, especially adults, they'll throw like a chop in and they'll mimic their golf swing or they'll mimic their baseball swing. And it's like, no, just train the muscles and the movement, thinking in that pattern. Don't think about your, the specific skill of hitting the ball or doing those things as well.
That's right. And I think one of the other challenges has been in our industry is that we've always broken movement down into muscles. But in reality, that's not how our brain interprets movement. We don't think this muscle does this and then positions this joint to do that. Yeah. We're task oriented. So if a ball's coming towards me, you're not thinking what the bicep and the tricep has to do upon getting your hands through. You know what I mean?
Yep.
We're not thinking about that at all. We're thinking about how do I get that ball from here to over there because the outfielder's playing too far towards center, right? And so that's how we play the game. And it's unfortunate because skill-based coaches as well as strength coaches want to break down things and then teach it back to them so that, like you said, so that they have purpose to it. Yep. It makes sense to them, right? Yep. And what we need to do is we need to change the narrative around muscle-based activity, which is valuable in itself, but change that to a task. What is the task? So in a deadlift, what's the task? Move the object from a lower position to a higher position. That's it, right? Yeah. It's not, this is this muscle and this is what I do, right? A lunge is we're going to take a step and then you're going to return. Yeah. That's the task, right? So if we start thinking of movements more as to what's the task and the intention behind it, then now the body will pick up on it because our intention's not on muscle. It's not on, I have to fatigue this muscle to get it to grow. It's no, I got to be efficient, effective, and economical.
And it's funny because you see that with bodybuilders who are muscular focused, their movement is very rigid and not fluid whatsoever in a lot of cases.
But that is their sport.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
what they need to do. They need to grow muscle so they can show muscle. That's their sport. That's why we don't do it for baseball or why we don't do it for hockey.
Yep, and that's awesome. Well, one thing I would love before we go is to just really break down for people out there the 4Q neuromechanical model, so that and just give an example of an exercise in each model, so that it gives them something that they can take away and think about, using maybe the same movement pattern in each one of the quadrants.
Right. So if you're listening to this, do me a favor, grab a piece of paper and draw a vertical line straight up and down. I'll kind of do it on my screen here. And then you're going to go across. So you've basically created a quadrant system, right?
Yep.
And so what I mean by quadrants is we got a top left, a top right, a bottom left, and a bottom right. And so we've created a modeling system that will allow us to take all exercises, all tasks, everything you've ever seen, and plot it into these quadrants. And why we do that is that gives us a reference as to structuring variability in our training, because we know that variability is the key to health. It's the key to performance. If I'm only training in one quadrant, I'm missing all the benefits that come from the other quadrant. So if I was to walk you through it, if I took the top left quadrant, I think I probably need to do this the way you're seeing me. So if I take the top left quadrant, we would call that linear loaded. So that means any activity that's in the top two quadrants, we say that is any exercise that's done with added resistance or added load. Okay, and we say it's linear because we're saying it's exercise that would primarily be done in the sagittal plane of motion, going forwards and backwards, or in the vertical plane of motion, going up and down. And so if I do an exercise in there, let's say the barbell squat, that's one that we all pretty much know. Barbell's on your back, I'm going up and down. We would call that a linear loaded activity. If I was doing a bench press, also, it's going in the vertical plane, I'm laying on my back, but the bar is being moved in the vertical plane. I'm not moving so much. We would say that is a linear loaded exercise.
Got it.
If I drop below, so I'm going from top left to bottom left quadrant, we would call that unloaded linear training. And this is where we see a lot of calisthenics. This is where we see push-ups and pull-ups and all the relative strength benefits that we get from those types of exercises. I'm still in that sagittal plane. I'm still in the vertical plane, but I'm just using my body weight. I don't have any additional resistance on me.
And for those purists out there, when he says unloaded, yes, we understand it is still loaded. What we're using this as a quadrant to understand that there's external load outside of my body weight that we're adding.
Yeah.
Where unloaded is just
Yeah.
strictly body weight, or
Yeah. And we wouldn't say that loaded is easier than unloaded.
Yeah.
So for me, a pull up is a lot harder for me than a pull down. Yep. But a pull up, we would drop that in the unloaded quadrant because I didn't add any more mass. Yep. But a pull down, like a lat pull down, is loaded because I've added an external resistance that I'm overcoming.
Got it. Yep.
Yeah.
Sweet. And then go to the other side.
And if I go to the top, let's go to bottom left or bottom right corner. In the bottom right corner, we call it unloaded movement training. And this is where you might see all your change of direction stuff. This is where we're incorporating moving side to side and moving with rotation. So the way we observe that is if the trunk and pelvis are moving through rotation or moving through side flexion, that's where that movement occurs. And just like the previous quadrant, there's no added load to that, right? So if I do a sideways lunge, we would call that an unloaded movement exercise. Or if I'm shuffling like in basketball and guarding someone, that's happening in an unloaded movement environment, right?
Got it.
And then above that is where, Viper Pro kind of was born, right?
Yeah.
Or the concept was born from Viper Pro, is that we had to find a place for it. And that's using sub-maximal load, because like you said, you can't take a barbell with heavy weights and move like this with it, right? I'm not going to take a 300-pound bar that I was squatting in the linear loaded one, the top left one, and just go like that. That's not going to happen. Well, I'll probably do a cartwheel, but but the idea behind it would be sub-maximal load in that quadrant. So it's probably, for most of us is depending on the task at hand, we still need to be able to move with good rhythm and timing with that load. So, but we do have some external mass to it. So here's where you see like medicine ball throws, right? Rotational medicine ball throw would be a good example that's in there. Yep. You might see, Dad asked me to shovel some gravel in the backyard. That's loaded movement training, Yeah. And so those quadrants help balance out all the neuromechanical stresses that are going through the body, through the joints and through the connective tissues and muscles and through the brain. And so if I have a little bit of training in all these quadrants, then I'm building a system that has balance, but it also is allowing for enough variability that my body can get what it needs the most, which is different loads at different times in different directions at different speeds.
And it's funny, and what's powerful too is especially I would say kids that when they're young and not as coordinated and large. I don't mean like meaning linemen in a football game, where a lot of times those kids are told their entire life, don't hit, be easy, you're big. And then all of a sudden you get them on the football field and you're like, go crush somebody. Right. But they're not only kind of not used to that, they're afraid to, and then they don't have that coordination. So it's almost so powerful to take them and do some of those things with them before they start doing the brute strength, because they have it. They just don't know how to use it and coordinate it. Yeah. Right.
Well, the first step I teach all athletes is about leverage. Yep. I was a 5'4" junior hockey player in Canada. I knew leverage quite well, because if I didn't, awesome. I would die, Yeah. But we teach them, like, every kid's going to have a different system of leverage. They need to learn where that is. And that's the best way to do it. Because when you teach in the 4Q, the drills themselves deliberately put kids in position where they're going to have to learn leverage to overcome a resistance in the top quadrants. And in the bottom quadrants, they're going to have to learn where their body needs to be positioned to handle that leverage.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anything, we talked about a lot and really appreciate it. This is some great stuff, especially for the parents out there. Make sure you pass this on and listen and or to the trainers as well. But anything that you want to end with, something that maybe we haven't talked about, or something that, you want to emphasize before we go?
I think the big thing is that, kids get into sports because they have a passion for the game. And it gets sad to me that when competition drives them out of sport because they don't feel that they're winning anymore. And I think that's the big thing that, remember, we learn best when we fail.
Yep.
And so we need to provide environments to allow kids to fail safely and to let them know that, put them in an environment where they will feel successful even when they lose.
Yep.
Right. And so the first question from a parent might not be, well, did you win today? It might be, how did you feel you played today?
Yep.
Did you enjoy it? Right.
Yep.
And by doing that, then now they enter into a competitive environment where they feel safe,
Yep.
where it's okay getting beat by another kid, or like applauding when another guy scores a goal on you, and it was like, wow, that was amazing, good job, bud, and you pat him on the butt,
But then you learn from that, right? Like so many people are
100%.
like, "Oh, that's soft." No, it's about learning and giving
That's
them
right.
that environment, and then making sure that doesn't happen again. If you
right.
put that competitiveness, what did you learn from that? And it's such a powerful. And I think
because remember, the outcome for sport is not to have kids become collegiate athletes or professional athletes. The idea behind sport is to make them a better mover for life so they can enjoy sport for life.
Yeah.
Right? Because you and I still enjoy sport, right? So if we still enjoy sport because we played sport our whole life, like we've made a career around it.
Yeah.
Right? And so by doing that for kids and doing that for people, then now we've got them enjoying one of the most beautiful gifts that the human organism can have, and that's to move for life.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's powerful, man. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for your contribution to what you guys are doing around the world, to improve our quality of life, and most importantly, like you guys say, your health and human performance. So thanks again, John. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jason. It was awesome talking with you again, bud.
Likewise. Have a good day.